Hi, this is Greg Koopman. Today I'm going to show you how to query files that are in your data lake in Azure from Azure Databricks. Okay, let's first of all just show you our data lake that I'm going to access. So my data lake's a very simple example here, not like a real data lake, but it has some similarities here. So we're going to have a data lake for a tennis center. Okay, that's in my Gen 2 data storage, okay, and in a blob container. Okay, so here it is here, and under here I have a folder called transactions. And so what you want to envision is that every day some tennis center pushes a number of detailed transaction files to a folder in this data lake. Okay, so I only have data in certain days here because I was just creating the sample data, so it takes a lot of time, so it's not very full at all. But I do have show you what data I have in there. So we emulate this from like a 2018, 2019, and 2020. So let's look at 2020. I double click on that, and we're going to emulate this as a week fiscal year. Okay, so I have different periods. So I have 13 periods, okay, and each period has 4 or 5 weeks. Okay, so if I go to period 3, for example, it's not March exactly because it could overlap into February and go into April, something like that. So, but anyways, in period 3, which is in period 3, I have 4 weeks listed, and in week 4, I have some data in the day 5. Okay, which looks like this. So that was March 24th. Okay, so I have a sales, I have purchases, I have memberships that are sold and lessons given, right? So these are the 4 files that are in those days, and you can see they're represented for that date, which is the 5th day of week 4 of period 3 in 2020. Okay, now I also have data in period 4. I don't have much data in here, guys, but that's okay. It's probably easier to follow the example. So in period 4, I have some data in week 1, and I have in day 4, I have my April 1st data. Okay, click back up. Day 2, I have, I don't have any data in day 2. And day 5, I have April 2nd data, right? 6, I have April 3rd data, right? This is sales CSV there. I don't have any other files there. Okay, and then 7, the same thing. Okay, now if I go back out of 4, this is the last one, week 2, I only have some data in day 5. Must have rained a lot that week. So day 5, I have data. Okay, so that's where the data is, and I just want you to notice that it crosses several different kinds of transactional tables. Okay. The tables that we're going to study today or pull from or query from is the sales transaction tables. All right. So how do we do this? These are just files, right? They're just comma separated value files, CSV files. So let's go over to Azure Databricks, and I'm going to show you how to connect to this Azure storage account, and then we're going to establish the path, okay? Because this is basically a static hierarchical path, right? So I want to show you how I can just pull from a certain day of the whole one single day, or one single week, or one single period, or a single year. Okay, so that's what I'm demonstrating the query and how that's done. Okay, using all the power of Databricks, which of course in this case we don't need any power because it's only a few table files. But if you just imagine that you have gigabytes and terabytes of data out there, and you have 10 years worth of data, all completely heavy files, tremendously big files. Okay, you don't want to go and have to just pull all that data into Databricks every time, right? All 10 years, it would take forever. When all you want to look for is a certain week of 1 year, you want to be able to kind of do some logical partitioning and set up your query so it only pulls from those files in that particular week or that particular day. Okay, and so that's where the bigger picture of this whole technique comes in. So now we're going to jump over to Databricks, and I'm going to show you, because now I've showed you the structure we're looking at there. Okay, so now I'm in my notepad over in Databricks, and I want to show you first. I've broken this notebook into several steps, and I'll go ahead and leave this notebook up on the where you can access it if you like. Okay, so first of all, I'm got my step 1 is to connect to the storage account over in Azure. Step 2 is I need to establish the folder information I want to query. Okay. Step 3, I create a Spark data frame, or it's really a data set, either way. And I establish the data frame, which is what basically comes back when I load data from the files out in the data, in the data lake. Then I created a view of that data frame. Okay, and from that view, I use SQL to access, just run queries against that view. Okay, and I'm able to get back that data. Prior to this step, we're using Python, and at this step, we're using SQL. Well, actually, this is still Python, and then we come in here, and as you see here, we use SQL. Then we use the query, and I'll show you that we can do an aggregate against that data. And we also can do a detail against that data. Okay. And then in step 7, I persist the table to a Databricks workspace so that after my session's done, my cluster's closed, I can still come back the next day, the next week, and access that data. Okay. And that's it. That's all the example shows. So let's go into this into detail now. So let's go to step 1, connect the storage account. So you saw my storage account, and this is the access key. Well, it's not really the access key because I'm not going to show you the access key. But this is, if you put this in, you will get an error because it's not exact, because I've erased some of the stuff. Okay, but basically, to get this access key for the data store account, you go to back to Azure. Okay, and here you're going to go into your storage account in Azure, and you're going to go to access keys, and that access key comes from here. All right, so as you see, of course, I blurred out some stuff, and you also have a second access key you could use. But basically, you just click on this little guy over here, and that will copy that access key for you. So you come back over to your Databricks, and you would copy that into here. Now, what I'm doing in here, it's all Python at this point, as you can see from up here. And so these are just variables. So storage account name is a variable. And I put my access key in the storage account access key. Surprise, surprise. Okay, so then after that step, okay, after I do that, I run that, right? I click on this little guy here and I run that. I've already run it, so I'm not going to run it again, especially because I run it again, it's just going to give me an error here. Then I have to go find my key and then whatever. I'm not going to rerun it again. It's already stored in that variable. So the second step is to establish an execution context, which you do here, okay? So here I'm passing in that storage account name as a variable, okay? And I use this command, and I also pass in the account access key. So that basically does a connection out to that storage account and establishes a connection, okay? Which I can do right now to demonstrate that. And I just run that, and it's sending out to the cluster. Of course, your cluster has to be on, all right? And it's completed already. It's established a connection, otherwise I see an error down here. Okay, next, in the next step, I'm going to establish my folder information. So initially, the first one, I have 4 different examples here. The first one filters data for the 6th day of period 4, week 1, and day 6. Okay, that's what this path shows me. Here, well, let me split my screen real quick so you can see what my Azure data structure looks like again. Okay, so as you see here in my folder structure, let me just get a little bit more room over here. There we go. So, again, this first example, of course, you know the pound signs are just commenting these other examples out, and I'm going to go through each one of these scenarios. So my most detailed one is just to grab the sales by day, right? So if I look at the file structure, I have my file container here, tennis center, right? And if you look over here, you have tennis center as a blob, as your blob container. Okay, and within that, let's move this a little bit like this. Here we go. So I have tennis center there, and then I go ahead and traverse these directories. So I'm going to go to 2020, which you see here. No, my bad. So I'm going back to tennis center, and my first folder is transactions, right? You see that here. Then you see 2020. I'm going to go to 2020. Now we see period 04, right? So I go to period 04, and I go to week 01. And of course, your ETL is going to bring this data in every day, right? You're going to have some process that brings this data and pushes it in the correct folder, okay? You have some logic in that, but that's not what this is about. This is about querying that data. So then I go to look at day 6, right? So day 6, well, day 6 only has one table and one file in it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just pull from that table. Okay, that's what this example is going to do. And if you read through these different variables, you'll see that my file type is CSV. My wildcard is sales asterisk, because in this case it's not going to matter. But in other cases where I have, memberships and lessons and all that kind of stuff, I don't want to pull that kind of data. I only want to pull the sales data. Okay, so your naming conventions, the way you set up your directories, all this stuff really counts here, because it's all part of this bigger strategy of how you're going to query your data and not have to query all of it and filter it after you bring it in. You want to be able to only bring in as much exactly the data you need when you do this query on the initial pull, all right, initial load. So that's my wildcard sales asterisk, and then I do some more concatenation and some abstraction of folders, and finally I get down to what is this file load path, right? And I'm just going to basically, after concatenating all this stuff together, you'll get a file load path, which we're going to use later, which when I run this, you're going to see that show up. So right now I'm going to go ahead and run this cell. It sets the variables, and file load path is presented down here, okay? And you see that is the sales asterisk. You see it's day 6, week 01, period 04, year 220, under transactions, and into this storage area, and into this container, that storage area, okay? Beautiful. And this is the Gen 2 type, okay? So that's going to allow us to get to that data. So that, remember, this file load path. So now we got our variables established. We're connected to the storage account. We have a connection, a context, but we haven't pulled any data yet. So that's what we're going to do in our next step here. So our next step is going to go out and actually, since this is really, we're only going to pull one file, because I showed you is we're only pulling for that day 6, right? And only the sales file. So I've already run this, so disregard this information here. So what I'm going to do now is run the current data I just put in. And notice in this path, it's going to put it into a data frame, okay? After Spark 2.0, data frame is about the same as a data set, so that's fine. So basically we're going to do a Spark, we're going to do a read, we're going to format it as CSV. Options, it's going to say the header. There's a header in this, so each for the first row is a header. It's going to infer the schema, so it's going to look at the file and figure out the schema on its own, and then it's going to load from the file load path, which we establish up here. Okay, and that's where we're telling it where the files are, or file in this case. And after that, we're going to display the data frame data. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. There's only one row in that file, so we should only get, well, actually in that file there's 3 different rows. Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Greg Koopman. So actually, if we go out and actually look at that file, and the easiest way to do that is to just go, I'll show you what that file should look like. Okay, so I have it emulated. If you look at that path here, okay, I have it emulated here. So if I pull up this CSV and throw it into an editor, you'll see there's Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, okay, and Greg Koopman, and that's in the April 3rd data file. Okay, sales. Okay, so just so you know, have a context of what these files look like, and how I just pulled that in. We're back into Databricks, and we got our 3 different rows there. Okay, so I'm not going to go in, and I'm going to go back, and we're going to now grab, and notice it's only for one day, right? April 3rd. Okay, that's what I want you to notice here. Now we're going to redo this. We're going to comment out the day, and we're going to go a little bit bigger, and we're going to see the whole week of the first week in 2020 period 4. Okay, so that's going to be, instead of being just day 6 over here, it's going to be week 1. It's going to include all these days. Now I know I have data in 4 of these days. I have data here in day 4, the sales data. Okay, in day 5 I have data. There's sales data again. And I'd show you the data here, but in this storage Explorer for Azure, it doesn't show the data. You have to download and all that, so I'm not going to bother you. I already showed you the structure. Okay, and then I have data in 6 and 7. You have to believe me for that. Okay, so basically this is going to, what I want you to notice here in the file location now, I've given it an asterisk here for this level of folders, the day level. Okay, so what that means is it's going to go out to 2020 P04 week 1, and instead of reading one day as it did up here, it's going to read all the days, all the folders under that. Now if you have other folders besides 1 through 7, well, it's going to read those folders too if you put an asterisk in there. But if you have a disciplined structure that you're using, then you won't have any problems there. So that's all part of your structure in that architecture. So I'm using an asterisk here, and so this will pull all these days for 7. So let's give it a shot. First of all, we have to reestablish those variables. Okay, I ran it, setting it out. It's established it. Now you look at the path, the load path it's going to use, and you see 2020-04 week 1, and then an asterisk, which means all the days, all the directories under week 1, and then the wildcard sales asterisk, which is only going to pull the files that start with sales. Okay, so now we go back down to our next step, and we're going to rerun our area. So we're going to expect, instead of one day, we expect, well, in this case, it's going to be 4 days worth of data, okay, for that week. Okay, so now I'm going to run it, run the cell, and there we go. Yes, you notice there's more data. I'm going to sort it now by date, just by clicking the header. 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4. Okay, so we have more, our data is growing, right? Okay, so again, I'm just showing you the different ways you can control your output, your load amount. Okay, so now we're going to go a little higher. We're going to show you how to do all of period 4. So instead of the week, I have 2 weeks there that has data in it. Week 1 and week 2 have data in it. Okay, and so now we're going to, by putting an asterisk in there, it's going to go into all the weeks under week and period 4. Okay, which if I go back over to this side and I go period 4, there's 5 weeks there, but I know there's only data in week 1 and week 2. So it's going to pull that data. So again, our result set later is going to be bigger, right? Okay, so basically I'm going to reinitialize those variables by hitting the run cell here and commenting out the one that we already had. So now we run that, and we have, as you see, we have our new file path, which includes these 2 wildcards, wildcard for the weeks directory level and the days directory level, but we still have our wildcard for sales. And now we're still at 220, year 220 and period 04. So now when I run this Spark, okay, notice we have, what do we have? 1, 2, 3, about 9 columns, and our lowest number is date is 4.4, and our first one's 4.1. So we can expect 4.1 again, but we should see that 4.4 as our lowest date, maximum date should increase, right? Because we're going to be adding that extra week, data from the extra week. So here we go. I just ran it again. Okay, it's coming back, and it doesn't come back sorted, so I'm just going to click the date column header. There's your 4.1, and notice that we still have all our 2, 3, 4, and like I said, in week 2, we also had another file and row in week 2 that was added to this. So that's George Washington on April 9th. Okay, so now we, as you see, we have data for that whole period, for the fourth period. Okay, not to be confused with the fourth month, but it aligns closely. Okay, as anyone would know from their fiscal period week type calendar. Okay, so the last example I'm going to show you, which isn't going to be which would be kind of obvious, is I'm going to comment out the period, and I'm going to filter now just by the year 220. Okay, now I know there's data, so I'm going to go back over here, 220, and I know there's data in period 3 and in period 4. There's not much data in 3, believe me. There's not much data anywhere in here. But period 4 and 3 happen, and most of the time, if you did it by the year, all these things would come back and you have tons of data, right? But in this case, since I don't have much data in my sample data, we have 3 and 4, and I'm going to go ahead and run that. So we reinitialize our variable, run cell. Now it's going to pick up all the data I have in that for 2020, and I'm going to run this, and we should see some March data come in, or period 3 in this case. So I'm going to sort it, and there it is. So Charlie Chaplin bought something in, had a sale in 3/24/2020, and again it goes all the way down to the 9th of April with George Washington, and that's all the data we have for the year 2020. Okay, so again, you notice how the wildcards are being used in this statement, and that's important. Okay, so that's how you can regulate what kind of data you bring back. Now let's move on to our next step. So we got our we've used our Python to get our data frames, data set established. Right now we have all the data for that year, right? Okay, so in fact, in this case, I want you to notice one thing. I'm just going to sort by sales in this case. So I want you to see, so we have like a 700, a 677, 500, right? So that's 1300, 1800, 1900, and then some more data here. Okay, so what we're going to do is, okay, so just remember that. But now we're going to go to step 4, and I don't think I need to, I think we can make this bigger again. So step 4, we're going to create a view from the data frame. So the data frame is sitting out there in Spark, and now we're going to create a view from it. Okay, and you do that in Python by using this statement. DF represents your data frame. Create or replace table view. Okay, so it's going to go ahead and take whatever's in that data frame and create a view out of it. And I call the view tennis center sales report. Okay, that's my view. So I'm going to go ahead and run this command. Run the cell. It's going out the cluster. It returns and it's successful. Okay, so our next step, so we have that in a view. So our next step is we're going to flip and we're going to go away from Python and we're going to use SQL language, so which is my best friend. And so you do that by putting in this percentage sign SQL, and that establishes that language. So now, as you notice, this is SQL. Beautiful. So now I don't have to go down here in the columns to sort it. I can go ahead and sort it here. So what I'm going to do is run this statement. And it runs, and here we go. Notice it sorts by date, which means 3/24 came up with Charlie Chaplin. And we go all the way down, and we can see all our data sorted by date. Okay, beautiful. Okay, no problem. Okay, let's try one more thing here in our next step. And our next step is going to use SQL language to query a view for sum of sales. So we're going to see the sum of sales. You remember what I showed you before with a 600, 670 when we sorted by sales here. Okay, and we saw those big numbers up there. So when you add all these numbers together, we should get, so I'm going to go ahead and run this query, which gives me an aggregate of sales. Run. And we run it, and the total is 2,054, which makes sense. So if we added all these numbers up together, we should have the same amount. Okay, so that's that. So again, so if I clicked here and you look at 700, 1,300, 1380. That's 1900, 1950. That goes into 2000. Yeah, definitely. That's the right number. Okay, so that's how we get to query the data in a data lake. Now, just extra. Let's say I'm done working with this, but you know what? I have to go home and then come back tomorrow and do some more work on it, or work on that table. I like the way that table looks, and I want to have to go through this again. Of course, you save your notebook, but if you don't want to go through a lot of it, all you have to do is then you can go back to Python, which you just don't put in the SQL language indicator, and you can write that format. And what I'm going to do here is write the format, all that data that's in the data frame still, and I'm going to write it as a parquet in a parquet format. I'm going to save the table out to the Databricks workspace area, and I'm going to call it tennis. Let's change that a little bit. Tennis Center Sales Report _ parquet. Okay, that's just for illustration purposes here. So I'm going to run that, and that's going to put that. It's going to persist that table out into my Databricks workspace. You probably might want to persist it back as a file out to the data lake, or maybe run it and send it over to SQL Server and store it as a table there. This is not for this particular lesson, but that's something that you can definitely do, and definitely is done regularly. Okay, so that completed successfully. So let's go ahead and just do a select. Go back to SQL, and let's select from that new table we just established. Okay, and see what it gives us. So I'm going to go ahead and run. It's sending it to the cluster. And now instead of running from the data frame, it's running from this view. Okay, not a view, actually. This is a persisted table at this point. So now it's running from this persisted table, and there's our data. Okay, again, we sort it by date, and you'll see March comes up first, and April 9th comes in last. Okay, so that's how it works. If we go over, by the way, if I went over to data over on my panel over here, my workspace panel, I can click there, and if you look over here, you see Tennis Center Sales Report Parquet. Okay, and if I click on that, you'll see the structure that it established. As you see, it inferred the schema correctly, and it shows the sample data, or in this case, all the data, and cool stuff. Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you learned something here.